Aloha. I wanted to do a video as a follow-up to the last two videos and take it a step further into observing the differences between people, observing the mixtures of light, the mixtures of color, like liquids in color, and the color spectrum as a whole, the primary, so-called primary colors, and relate it to the electromagnetic soul plane spectrum that I was getting at in reference to the North Pole and the people of the sun, or the equator, and just take it one step further into like my own theoretical perspectives, I guess. And this is gonna be like a, not necessarily a controversial video, but it's going to be a video where I'm stepping further out into my theories from just the information that I've observed, and it's kind of like a new place for me to go in as far as sharing, because I've never really thought about the depths of this before like this, let alone share them with people. But since the information was there, and I'm gonna be kind of like going all over the place with it, just bear with me, and we'll see what comes up, because there's some information there that I had been observing with the differences between people, and just attempting to understand from like the most clear or the most basic perspective, like what's really going on with the differences of people. There are many differences between the so-called races of people, and I want to understand why things have been the way they have been, and why things are the way they are. I want to understand on a deeper level what the white supremacy program is, its origins. Right now, my depths of origins of understanding the white supremacy program and the white privilege program is rooted in the understanding of white genetic annihilation existing, and the inherent desire to protect your genetic existence. Excuse me. So, in order to, and for people who don't understand white genetic annihilation, for a very basic overview, it's the understanding that if a black woman and a white man has a baby, that baby will be brown or black. Kinky hair, or not understand kinky hair, but curly hair, and the so-called black genetics are dominant. Same goes for if a white woman has a baby with a black man, it will be the genetics will be so-called black dominant. If you multiply that times 100 or 1,000 years, you will understand that this whole earth plane experience will be black and brown, and the so-called white race, or Caucasian race, or whatever, will kind of like assimilate, I guess, into the mixtures of people, and its inherent design will be removed from the spectrum of human light, and a part of the system. So I wanted to understand why. I want to question this reality. Okay, why are those genetics different? Why not just see that they exist? So Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, if you want to look into that more, she goes into that existing, and why it's being protected. I wanted to take it a step further with this video and understand not only why it's being protected with the white privilege and white supremacy program. I wanted to question the reality of why the genetics are different like that and why they exist as such. Go into understanding like the eye color and the eye color differences, the relationship with the sun, how pale people get burned by the sun, and so-called black or brown people actually get darker with the sun. So it's like a different relationship. It's a different energy. Yes, of course, so-called white people get brown with the sun too. What I'm saying is that overall, the basic observation is so-called black people soak up the sun's energy and do not burn in relation to the so-called white people who actually reflect that light energy. They block it in a sense and actually burn because of that blocking and not of the absorbing. So I want to understand why these relationships with nature are different, why it's existing the way it is, without judging it in any kind of way, but really just understanding why it exists. And I had to go into the primary colors and understand the differences between light mixtures and, well, that actually kind of just came up yesterday, and I wanted to add it to my perspective. I'll get into that in a second, but before I get into that, I wanted to share a couple of comments from the last video. I think it's the last two videos of the last video. This is from the last video as far as positive cognitive dissonance. And this is I wanted to share this as another good example of what positive cognitive dissonance looks like as far as like defending itself, defending the program, and creating this relationship or this generic this generic understanding of our history as if everything is the same and everything is just cool. See, what it really boils down to, and I'm not going to spend much time on this because you can read this comment. Anytime I talk about slavery, I'm not just talking about slavery. I'm talking about slavery, the colonial program, the massacres, the genocides, the torture, the stealing of land, the sickness and disease, the installation of sickness and disease, the using of biochemical warfare to destroy people with the vaccines, with smallpox blankets, chopping people's limbs off to control them, psychologically enslaving people with religion, with scientism, with everything. I'm talking about slavery as a whole. The full spectrum of slavery is where I'm coming from. When I speak about slavery, in order for people to, like this commenter, to protect itself or to maintain, it's really just an emotional body response. In order for that to exist, they have to throw out stats. So anytime I mention slavery, people talk about the Irish slaves, people talk about the serfs, people talk about white slaves as a whole. And I understand that. I know that exists. I've mentioned that in previous videos. What I'm saying is that anytime I'm mentioning this, I am referring to the very obvious differences between the actions of slavery as a whole and what it's connected to. See, when I mention slavery, I'm actually coming from the the colonial perspective, the what's added up to this reality today, what's going on today, which is the full spectrum of the religious slavery program that has gripped 95% of the earth plane. And you can see the psychological slavery of Christianity and Catholicism and what that does to the family, to the culture, to the individual, to the collective as a whole. That slavery, where that's connected to, what's that connected to? I'm talking about the stealing of land through the colonial program, the dumbing down, or the hatred that's installed for indigenous and aboriginal people because we have been deemed as primitive or savage and have been enslaved and tortured by for so many years to keep this program afloat, to keep this kingdom, this British kingdom, this colonial kingdom afloat. It's been built on the backs, you can understand, with the United States. It's built on slavery. It's built on the stealing of the Native American land. If you go into the justices of that with the consciousness that we have reached today in relation to what it was in the past and before that, the so-called powers that be would not exist. And the so-called powers that be have a very definite shade of, for lack of a better terminology, skin tone, I would say, when you understand the colonial program. When you see British flags all over Canada, our British flags over Canada, when you see the British Virgin Islands, when you see the taking over, renaming of entire people, islands of people, countries of people. New Zealand, British flag. America Samoa, American flag. The United States flag. Hawaii, British flag. Guam, American, all these American or so-called American military bases all over the world. This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about slavery, what it's become. And when I talk about what it's become, I'm not talking about the fact that also so-called white people have been enslaved. I'm just not really focusing on it. I'm not focusing on it to act like it doesn't exist or didn't exist. I'm not focusing on it because it's minute, really, in comparison, not to take away from it. It's minute in comparison to the reality of when you observe the fact that it's not just about slavery. When I'm addressing it from like I mentioned before, the torture, the massacres, the genocides, the chopping off of limbs, the stealing of land, the stealing of psychologies, the installing of religion. That slavery as a whole is a completely different definition. And when you understand it as that, from that perspective, then you start to realize the tens of millions or hundreds of millions of African people who have been enslaved over generations. You can understand the colonization of Africa, the colonization of the entire earth plane, added up to today. It's not a one perspective. I'm not talking about slavery as the definition of slavery as it's written in Webster's dictionary. I'm talking about slavery expanded all the way up into the colonial observation. So now that I've set that straight, and then because it's constant, it's a constant reaction from these individuals to say, well, Over 150 million of my people during the Dark Ages were enslaved. Look up the serfs and medieval white slaves. So I actually use this as a as a jump off point to go into the medieval times and show some examples of medieval to expand upon that. So this is another example of positive cognitive dissonance. It's like this individual is in this kind of love and light perspective, this we're all one, and it's hard to go into these perspectives. It's hard to go in to look at yourself and see what's going on. Another thing that I realized in reference to what has changed over time that's part of this is the evolution of so-called white people. This is part of this video, but I'll just mention it now. We can understand, because I'll get into that in a second. We can understand how bad it was in the medieval times, how bad it was in like during the colonization, during King Leopold in the Congo, massacring 10 million African people, taking over that land, the entirety of Africa being colonized for its minerals, for control. Ultimately, I mean, on the outside, they were saying, oh, they were taking it, they were enslaving the people and colonizing the land for the riches of Africa. But when you really look at it, it wasn't for that. It was for the control of the people, the consciousness, the beating down of that energy that is the essence of the origin of the conscious human being, and the installing of a new version of reality that is based upon what they initially went in there for, the worshiping of the physical reality, the minerals, to soak the energy up. So just as much as you can understand those individuals, countries went into Africa to steal gold, diamonds, precious gemstones, the oil in Iraq, Iran, the poppy seeds in Afghanistan. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. What this colonial program even today has done to build itself up at the expense of nature, at the expense of humanity. The fiat currency and the materialistic version of reality has overtaken the very humanity of the overall collective consciousness. And when you understand who's in charge of that collective consciousness, not completely, but on one very observable perspective, when you understand the United States being the so-called New World and all this stuff, and Columbus and the British Empire sending its people over there to take over the Americas, to take over the indigenous peoples, the Aboriginal people all across the earth plane. They already did it in Africa. They did it in Australia. Now they had to do it in the Americas. So they sent the Spanish down to South America to enslave, with Catholicism and the Spaniards, the hardcore people, to knock out slavery on that scale. And then they sent the French and the nicer versions of Europe, the European colonization, to enslave through trade, and with the Native Americans in North America. So this is a very calculated move over centuries that has gone on, that is the foundation of what we are existing under today. And I wanted to take it a step further into understanding like why things are the way they are. And this is another comment that added up to me stepping into that space, because now, I mean, I've heard other people talk about it too, but this is another observation by an individual who shared it that I can now share with you to also show that I'm not the only one that sees this stuff too. So, so I'll read it real quick just to give it a little. I'm sure you read it already, but I paid a coffee to a homeless black friend of mine. Now seen him 3 times, and we had to talk about eye colors, because the white girl at the coffee shop had amazing blue eyes. By the way, I am white. Mine are green. And I told him about how I think that white people might be more genetic modified, kind of like Dracula's baby, and that black people are the real first humans with good genetics. He told me that the way he sees eye colors is white people are better and have more opportunities and positive visions of life, so they get bright eye colors, and that him, aka black people, are born with only rage, so the dark eyes. So this is a perfect example of the Jesus programming and the Barbie programming, and how it builds up people and it builds down people. This is another example of that. And yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So that's an actual slavery. It's the creating of the privilege mentality, because when you talk about white privilege, and people try to defend that it doesn't exist, or even supremacy, they have to take it from something that's like tangible. So they say, well, I'm suffering, or white people are living on the streets too, and white people don't have like great jobs, or they have to talk about stuff, materials, things. But when you really get down into it, the white privilege and white supremacy, it's more vibrant energetically in the psyche of the individual, and really doesn't matter in reference to overall, in reference to the materialistic conversion table that people have to do. And I'll get into that in a second too, with how things have to be manipulated into the materialistic observation world to be like understood as equal. Everything's equal. Slavery, black people equal to slavery. White people, it's the same. We've been enslaved too. It's like, okay, well, this is not the Webster's dictionary version of slavery that I'm referencing here. It's beyond that. So let me read on. So yeah, dark eyes means bad. So just like the baby in the last video, the black baby's the bad baby to the kid, and the white baby's the good baby. This is the program. That's the privilege. That's how far that goes. So I was like, oh my God, dude, that's not it in my opinion. See how Hollywood magic spells made him think he was nothing good. Yeah, so good thing is he left with a nice smile, thinking of how I see black or other colors as a positive people. Anyway, good videos. Okay, so thank you for sharing that, Alex. I want to go into, take that a step further in understanding the genetic differences. And that they're obvious, and like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the relationship to nature. The power grid that we are existing under today has a very obvious disconnect with nature. In the as above, so below perspective, if you are connected with nature, if you are deeply rooted, like the indigenous and aboriginal people living in the rainforest, living with nature, not as savages, not as primitives, in complete harmony. They're only seen as savages and primitive because of the evolution theory, monkey mind mentality that whole farce of where we came from as humans. And that's why indigenous so-called black people and aboriginal people can be seen as savages and primitive, because the so-called new perspective of reality, this so-called civilized reality, is based upon an invention and many inventions. And one of the many inventions is this so-called this civilization. It's like, well, you need religion. You need freedom. That's what it is today. They need some freedom. And we're going to send our guns and our airships over there and give them some damn freedom. That's the whole mentality. But it's not just that. So I wanted to go into understanding the differences in the genetics, the differences in the eye colors and stuff like that, and just take it from there. This is very obviously going into theory land, but it makes sense to me, and it makes sense to other people too. So we have to start understanding why things are the way they are in order to understand what we're gonna do, how we're gonna move. And because you can't understand where you're going if you don't know where you're from or who you are. Just like if you can't understand your strengths if you don't understand your weaknesses. So going back to like the indigenous and aboriginal people being called primitives, it's only because that definition only exists because these individuals who created this so-called new version of humanity based upon lies had to they put on a suit in order to hide the fact, like, a suit doesn't make you smart. Like a crown doesn't make you a king. This stuff doesn't make the materials that you've stolen, the stuff that you put on your body doesn't make the person. See, like the crown and the so-called religion and all that stuff of the past, that's the same thing that's happening today. Your car, your fancy this, your fancy that. That's the materialistic version of reality that exists in Hollywoods and celebrities and all that stuff. And that's what's worshipped today. That's what makes actual people gods. People worship these idols. And that's what this whole system is based upon. The sort of genetically modified version, the separation from nature, worshipping separation from nature. So this goes into the light mixtures that I'm going to get into in a little bit, but before I get there, I wanted to share this perspective because that individual, the first comment mentioned the medieval, look into the medieval stuff. And when I read that and remembered, medieval times was actually the peak of so-called white control. That's when they were at their best, was during the Dark Ages, the medieval times. You could argue obviously today, and this is also part of the evolution of so-called white people that I didn't really go into, but you can see that this is a starting point, because it's celebrated. It's celebrated. All of this stuff is celebrated in order to, medieval times, dinner and tournament. This is a thing that's being celebrated as, the good old days, in a sense, because it was that time when Rome ruled the world, and you had castles all over the place, and it was just this was the end of the Moorish Empire or whatever it was, and the installing of the British Empire from Rome, because everything that yeah, so this is like medieval times. This is so-called like the literally the castle on the top of the hill, the top of the mountain for so-called white people. And you can see what it's based upon. You can see what it's built on. And when you really get into it, as far as this is concerned, even back then, all of this so-called civilization was stolen from the Moors. It was actually, before Europe was Europe, it needed to be taught by the Moors how to, everything that they got in their society, the plumbing, the running water, how to clean, how to dress, how to the intelligence, the so-called logic, all of this shit was stolen from Egypt into Greece, into Rome, then made its way up to the medieval times, and they celebrated it. And even when the so-called Europeans were in Europe, they needed to be helped out by the Moors to understand how to take care of themselves. And then once they created that so-called civilization, then that's when the overt enslavement and the expansion of the colonial program went into effect. So it was like, teach me everything, now I'm gonna fucking enslave you and take over everything, and this is what's added up to today. But the thing I wanted to get into, show an actual proof. So you saw how it was being, you saw how it's being celebrated. Like this medieval times, the dark ages is being celebrated as the peak of so-called European or the Caucasian or so-called white people civilization. This shit was invented during that peak. These torture devices. This is what I'm referencing right now in reference to the slave model, the slave mentality. It's not just about slavery. It's about humanity. It's about the inhumanities that have manifested into that separation from nature, separation from your people, the protection of the white genetic annihilation that was known back then. It was known that if a black man has sex with a white woman, you will have a black or brown baby. It was known that that was existing. This is why these torture devices existed. This is why these mentalities had to be so big and installed into the human consciousness, installing fear into the consciousness system. Just like how I was thinking the other day, what trauma does to the memory. So when you understand like circumcision, a baby, brand new baby, this is an actual torture. This is a torture that is understood as normal in today's so-called civilization. And how I was seeing the circumcision storyline is what trauma does to the memory, what trauma does to when you show up somewhere. Like if you show up somewhere and somebody cuts a part of your fucking dick off and you're like, you're not gonna like that place. You're gonna be like, what the fuck just happened? I just got here and you wanna chop a piece of my dick off? What? Like, so that trauma exists for life. That trauma exists, and what it does is it separates you. So just as much as it separates you from people who experience extreme trauma or PTSD or rape or whatever it is, like these individuals, it affects the mind. It affects the chemical balances and the psychology. So obviously, having a piece of your foreskin being sliced off as soon as you come out of the womb, as soon as you join into this reality, it's going to affect the relationship to this reality and the relationship to your energy before you got here. It's going to affect that place, that relationship, that memory. So you spend 9 months in comfortable, safe, in your creative energy, in your spark with your mother and the Most High Spirit, and then you're born here, and some doctor gets a razor and like sends you into this extreme traumatic event as a baby. You experience pain. You experience the memory. Like, you experience this whole thing. So what that does, how I see it, is that it shuts off your relationship to like the beauty, the comfort, the protection. Like you're just born, you're with your mother, like, and then they slice your shit, and then you're with your mother, and you're like, what the it's so traumatic, it's so like all over the place. So that's directly linked to how I'm seeing it, separating the individual, locking you into the physical reality with trauma, locking you here, locking you out of your spirit connection, locking you in with the pain, with the trauma, with the lack of memory, with the separation from that whole space, just like they separate the mother from the child in the hospitals. All this is a part of the spiritual warfare that was actually more open and in your face in the so-called medieval times, or the Dark Ages, at the peak of this colonial age, this colonial so-called civilization that people I heard somebody even reference in a video just yesterday, the origins of not the origins, or the cradle of civilization, Greece and Rome. Like, have you heard of ancient Kemet? Have you heard of Nubia? Have you heard of Kush? Have you heard of Africa? Have you heard of like all that, those places, spaces, those civilizations in Africa? Have you heard? No. It's like history, humanity starts at Greece. It starts at Sumer. It starts at anything other than Africa. It starts here, and then you just move from there. That is a trauma, like this stuff is a traumatic reality that's being ignored, and that has a very specific focus. Not saying that torture wasn't practiced by people in Asia, or torture wasn't practiced. I'm saying that it was taken to a totally different level, a totally different degree. It was accepted on so many different layers of intensity in the so-called white civilizations. It's been taken so far, and when you go even further, not that long ago, still today, and when you see that slavery was only stopped within less than 100 years ago, like that mentality is still alive. It's still in the so-called powers that be mentality. It's the same devices. Hollywood is a different form of torture. The education system is a different form of torture. It had to evolve with the consciousness of the people, along with the evolution of so-called white peoples, like this, like the medieval times. It was accepted. People were celebrating. They were like, yeah, lynch that mother, or strap them to all this shit. And even in the American slavery time frames, this is the same shit that was used. This is accepted. This is how the power of the so-called the colonial empire rose to power, rose to, your United States presidency, rose to the Queen of England, rose to the colonial enslavement connected through the Vatican, connected through the Jesuits, connected through all these different factions that are a part of this enslavement program, are very specific to the so-called white frame of thought, or whatever you want to call it, and is in direct relation to the separation from nature. If you're separated from nature, then you will be existing in that which is unnatural, and that which is unnatural is okay, it's normal. So the normalization program is based upon the separation from nature. And when you're separated from nature, you'll do the most unnatural shit ever. And I wanted to understand what that is on like a basic scale, because it's still existing today. Drones, that's torture. People living in Syria and Iran and Iraq who have to look up in the sky or be worried, have constantly be worried about something flying over them and bombing them. That's torture. Waterboarding. All this shit that's happening in Guantanamo, that's like a fucking joke for the so-called powers that be. Like, oh, we can't do it. But they can't let go of anything. They can't close down Guantanamo, because that will mean they'll have to close down military bases in Guam. Then they'll have to close down military bases in Hawaii. Then they'll have to close down military bases in Iran. Then they'll have to close down military bases in Africa, military bases in Southwest Asia or Southeast Asia. They'll have to close down all these bases. If they give a little, then we'll take a lot, because the consciousness of the people today is like, if you don't need all this shit, stop doing this. And yeah, so this is what I wanted to get into in relation to like the consciousness taking a dip, a side step in reality, when we went from one perspective of connected with nature, which is like the indigenous aboriginal perspectives, into this so-called civilized society, which is the colonial program of today. And all of that I just went into was just really just to share, like, well, obviously what I mentioned, but also like slavery is not just slavery. Slavery is the massacres and the genocides and the sickness and disease on a psychological and a physical level and a spiritual level. It's all of the above. And the so-called positive cognitive dissonance is the protection for that, is to make everything equal. We're all the same. Everything is just so fucked up by the system. These are the bad guys, and we're all the same good guys. We've all suffered the same, and let's just make this change. And who's in charge of the change? The same people, the same mentality. If it's in that box, it's the same thing. Adjusting to the transhumanism design, adjusting to inheriting the university system ideas of change and evolution, and it's all going to be part of this pressure relief valve. And yeah, so now that I've set the tone of the differences between like people, and not, like I said, not saying that certain individuals in other than white people who have done some of the most heinous shit, not saying that they don't exist. What I'm saying is that as a people, as a culture, as a psyche, the ones who have most separated from nature on a natural scale and on a human scale have been the so-called white people. And when you take it into just an observation of the even the anatomy or the relationship to nature when you understand the sun, the reflecting of the sun, and the absorption of light. The reflection of light and the absorption of light. The reflection of nature, which is the destruction mentality, or the absorption of nature, which is the becoming part of nature, which is what the black and browns, indigenous and aboriginal peoples have already done. So in order to, how I'm seeing it now, in order for the so-called white people, this, I'll say, for lack of a better understanding, new race of humans, because there's a difference from the original race. There's this new race who's learning what humanity is, who's learning what nature is through a different version, through a different angle, through like the mixtures of people. This is why the cultures have been like, this is why culture has been stolen so much by the so-called colonial program, or so-called white people, like cultural appropriation and so on and so forth. Breaking of the noses, going into Egypt and stealing all the math and the sciences and taking it to Greece and putting their name on it and saying they did it. Going into Europe and saying that, oh yeah, we're building all these castles, and saying they did it all by themselves. Like, no, you got this shit from Moors. You in Greece, you got this shit from Egypt. Like this is all stolen, and the history books are what we are underneath today, as like enslaved by today. The mentality, the stealing of history, the recreation of history. So whoever writes the history books can control the present and the future. So this is the magic that we are under today. And it's based on destruction, death, destruction, sickness, disease. So they can provide your medicine, provide your, if they provide for you, then they are your kings. They are your rulers. They are your gods. This is what the university system is based upon. In order for you to be separated from nature, they have to install a totally synthetic version of reality. A synthetic version of connection to spirit, synthetic version of connection to nature, a backwards and upside down version of alchemy, and use it against you. And you have to worship the system. So like I was talking about, I keep going in and out of the evolution of so-called white people and the system as a whole, is stuff like back in the day when they used to promote smoking. And even today you can see smoking legal, or tobacco legal, and alcohol legal. As fucked up as those two main things are in relation to like the plants of like psilocybin and cannabis, just for an observation, for those two against alcohol and smoking. This is normal in a destructive, separated from nature reality, and what is natural is cannabis and mushrooms. That's illegal in the abnormal reality, which is normal. This is the backwards, upside down version of reality that we are not challenging because of the fear programming that has been installed all the way back from the medieval times, from the installation, the foundations of the colonial program, from the even the United States slavery, the emphasis of that. It's this artificial power, and you worship because you have been traumatically enslaved and your history has been destroyed. Only in 1978 were the Native Americans allowed to practice their religious practices legally, with like peyote and the eagle feathers and their spiritual practices that they were doing before Columbus got here, before the so-called forefathers got here. It's making you wrong. and making the system right. This is what's happening today when you look at Standing Rock. And it's based upon the materialistic version of reality. The ancient civilizations, the indigenous and the aboriginal people, were anchored in the spiritual relationship to nature and the Most High as a whole. Their relationship to their existence was from a spiritual perspective. In the spiritual warfare reality, in order to make that, to demonize the spirit, which is the atheism program in the university system, which is what the university system is based upon, you have to have a new God. You have to have a new idol to worship. This is the physical body. This is what's called astrophysics or physics. These demigods like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye, Carl Sagan, Michio Kaku, Ray Kurzweil, all these individuals are thrown in your face as the end-all be-all of understanding your reality. It's only the boxed-in reality, the worshiping of the materialistic version. And they have to create a new version. It's an emptiness. It's an empty reality. And how I'm seeing this is the reflection. It's the reflection of spirit. The adding up of, it's the way how I was seeing it is actually, I'm gonna go deeper into it because I know this video's run long enough, but I'll go deeper into it in the next few videos or whenever it comes up, because I'm sure I'll get more revelations, I guess, in reference to what this all means. But it's basically how light comes together. This is going into like my theory of not just light, but of humanity and the various ways to get through humanity. So get to connecting with nature in the physical plane and the spiritual plane of the Most High at the same moment. So you can get there through, these are energies of the duality system. So like I was talking about the magnetic and electric frequencies, in order to have light, you have to first have the dark. So what came first was the darkness, the space itself, then the stars, in order to maintain like that relationship and create other fabrics of universes so that more light can grow and understand itself in its own way, in its own style. The solidified light that the human experience is manifested into this earth plane reality of this soul, electromagnetic soul plane, from the connection with nature, the connection with the material realm as the material realm, as the so-called the melanated peoples, the dark peoples, the connection with nature, the connection with the sun, the understanding of the cosmic mother, the manifestation of the cosmic mother, balanced equally in the divine masculine and the divine feminine. In order to understand itself and have the balances in the extremes of this extreme free will reality, the backwards manifestation of coming from the darkness to the light, now as a manifestation of the light, having to understand its darkness and the origin of its darkness. Its essence is of a reflective nature, not of an absorbing nature. But it absorbs its reality through the moment, through the understandings of everybody else. This is why all these things have been stolen, and like it's the so-called white people reflect energy, but in order to absorb energy, it has to absorb it in the experience, in the moment, in the reality. So this is why, how I'm seeing it more so than why it's kind of like being pieced together as I'm going. This is obviously theory. This is like the relationship that this can go in or be more easily understood from the perspectives of people who go from the crown down to the heart, through the heart to the roots, or go from the streets or the roots up to the crown from a chakra perspective through the heart. I know this is kind of all over the place right now, but some people understand where I'm coming from who have been watching my other videos. But when you get hung up in the new age like perspective, I'm just going to go with it. When you get hung up in the new age perspectives, you're getting hung up in the higher sort of floaty, uprooted mentalities, connections, observations, and not really understanding the depths of and the reality, the meaning, the purpose of having the physical body, of being in this divine physical vessel. When you go from the roots to the crown, it's more of a natural process because you're starting from the earth and you work your way up. And you have a deeper compassion when you come from that natural design and then go into understanding the higher chakras. You can only understand the higher chakras if you have a deeply rooted origin. You have a deeply rooted connection with nature. The manifestation of that natural connection is in the so-called melanated people. The reflective energy within the so-called white race is a different form. It's a modified version of humanity in some kind of way. I don't know how, I don't know who, I don't know what. It is, though, when you understand the relationship to the sun, when you understand the differences of absorbing of light, how people with light eyes have difficulty in the sun, like it hurts their eyes. They have to wear sunglasses who have light eyes and this whole thing. So, yeah. So basically how I'm seeing it is the relationship to light is the relationship to spirit. If you absorb light, you're in a constant state of growth, like the plants. If you reflect light, you are actually worshiping yourself. You only have the ability to worship yourself. Because when all of that has come together, it's creating a boxed in reality. It's not creating another version, another space to create another universe like the original style, from the darkness to the light. When you go from the light to the dark, you have to reroot yourself in that darkness to light, and it's manifested into with that separation has manifested into the destructive nature. That's how I broke it down. And this is just another version. I don't even know if the video is still running, but this is just another version of how light works. Because this is obviously the paint and the ink. That's the material realm. The subtractive, the darkness before the light, the creating of a universe. This is how your printers work. And what's worshipped today is the the RGB, or the red, green, and the blue, which is what your television is based upon. So it's inherently telling you that this is what it's all about. It's all only about the light and void of the darkness, or the balances. This is why we worship the television and celebrities, and even down to how you absorb light. It's not just about the cones. So the cones, it's about the cones and the rods. The rods actually absorb 1,000 times more light than the cones, but they can only see in black and white. These are the rods on the left side. And there's 120 million. So the rods and the cones are built up of proteins, the same kind of proteins. They're just built differently, and they do different things. So like the rods, this is why it's so hard to adjust to light. Like when you go from a dark environment into a lit room, your eyes have to adjust. Your eyes adjust more quickly because there's so many rods in comparison to cones. When you have, it's easier for the cones to adjust to color. It's faster to see the differences of colors as opposed to adjusting to light. And this is the movement, this is the energy of the proteins adjusting to that reality. So the mixture of these two, the black and white, the light and the dark, and the colors, is what creates your reality, what makes your reality. It's the mixture of the two. The worshiping of one, which is the television, which is the so-called worshiping of light only, and the void of the material universe, the ma'at, the actual connections with nature, is a different realm. So I'll get into this even more, and if you, like I said, I'm just putting this together. I wanted to share this theory from what it is right now. On the top is like the eyeball next to the cones. You can see the cones are focused right in that little pink area, that pink dot. And this is a video put together. If you just look at rods and cones on a video, this guy, I can't remember what video it is. It's like one of the main videos up there. He did this pretty simple explanation. But the rods are all on the outside, and the cones are centralized in that center. So I was seeing that also as like the focus of energy, the focus of worshiping yourself, the worship of that centerpiece, that focus only on the colors and not understanding the meaning and the purpose of the 1,000 times the absorption of light on the most basic scales, the most basic connections to nature. So the manifestation of the so-called white people is just the same thing, is to absorb all of these different colors of the reality and sell it back to you as if it's the only thing, in order for you to worship the only reflective light energy, the light body, the light, the lighter version of humanity, the reflective humanity, the reflective human experience, as opposed to the absorbing light human experience, the relationship to nature. So taking it to a further extreme, personalizing, or not personalizing it, but to the human experience. This is how I was just seeing it. I know this is gonna help other people, like trigger other people as I'm going on. Like I was saying, this is kind of new for me. I'm kind of piecing this together as I go, and I just wanted to share it as it is, because I know some people understand where I'm coming from. I know it's going to be difficult for other people. They'll be like, "Oh, you're a fucking idiot" or whatever. That's fine, but for the people who understand where I'm coming from, I just wanted to share this, because this is how I'm seeing why things are the way they are in relation to so-called race, the so-called white race, and the original people, melanin, how we absorb light, how we are light, a manifestation of light, and what that relationship is in relation to the electromagnetic scales and the electromagnetic soul plane as a whole. The understandings of, or the theories of the earth plane being an eye, taking it further. From the illusory perspective of the boxes within the boxes, this is where it's going. It's like from the Jesus programming of this kind of programming to the Barbie mentality to this new age alien agenda, and more worshiping of the material realm. That's what these spaceships are. It's the entities in the material realm. So taking it a step further into the channeling perspective, hopefully the video is still running. How I was talking about how Bashar is a so-called future version of Daryl Anka 700 years from now. That future only exists based upon the reality that we are experiencing right now. We are creating the future based upon this reality. So if this reality is based upon the evolution theory, the university system, the materialistic version of reality, the worshiping of the aliens, the new age agenda, then it will create that future reality where those entities exist, those so-called aliens exist. And they exist in that artificial synthetic timeline that these so-called completely separated from nature in one sense, not completely obviously, but separated from nature on so many senses, on the spiritual nature, that they created a timeline and total races of people and that have worshipped the materialistic realm that can now travel at least through channels to speak to us in order to, like I said in that Bashar video, Bashar is actually trying to protect his existence by channeling to the so-called past, to coddle the current timeline, to create the future where he exists, or they, or that energy exists in and as. So going into the most separated versions of existence, that's how I'm seeing that. Some those worst of the worst channels, who are obviously, if you can channel so-called benevolent energies, then you can also be channeling malevolent energies, and you can also, that means you can also channel malevolent energies that are pawning themselves off to be benevolent energies. And if that exists, then what are you really dealing with when you're talking about channelers? You don't know, because they can say anything. And on the most like the most obvious scales for me to see in relations to some of these channelers, that was that protecting of its own existence is obvious to me, and because it's a worshiping. That's what these UFOs are. That's what all this shit is. It's about technology. It's what we're creating now. So literally, this is a new race of future timelines, and it's based upon the separation from nature, like the destructive energies of the society, the earth plane that we are in today is creating the futures where these so-called aliens are. It's all based upon the material, trapped within this physical realm, separated from the spiritual realm. Now, this is just one version that I've been mentioning and thinking about. Obviously, it's more complex than just this, but this is a reality that I see that exists in some kind of way. And in order to protect that reality in the so-called future timelines, the destructive mentality has to adjust to a more benevolent looking type of existence to make you believe in it. So it adjusts to the consciousness in order to control the consciousness of the so-called future and create a so-called future based upon the worshiping of the material realm and the creating of timelines where these synthetic versions or these adjusted forms of humanity can exist. So that's where all these politics comes from. This is another example of what's the absorption of light, of the absorption, the people themselves, of how we absorb light and how we reflect. Some individuals reflect light. You absorb nature or you reflect nature. If you reflect nature, then you have to worship yourself as nature, and everything else is working against you. That's where this whole guilt program comes in with the so-called white race and that whole mentality. Well, when you boil it down to the basic observations of this and try to understand what nature is in relation to humanity, you will understand that the melanated people absorb light. And when you're putting on sunscreen, you're putting on pretty much blackface and to absorb light, not to screen you from light, to absorb light so it won't burn your ass. This is another example of the worshiping of the self. So this is Epicurus, the mentality of reflecting light, reflecting spirit. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Questioning the essence. It's the box within the box. Questioning the essence in order to worship itself. Then he is not omnipotent. Omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? This came up when I just Googled atheism, and you can see all the atheism perspectives are based upon dumbing down or beating up religion and this kind of perspective. The malevolent God, or the it's perceiving your reality based upon your perspectives, not going outside of the box. See, this is all based upon the physical reality. So it's all based upon the duality program. So you're under the atheism program is seeing the source energy, or the most high energy, based upon the duality perspective, taken to its extreme separation program, which is this destructive civilization in order to worship itself. Intellectually, so-called intellectually, and by demonizing spirit as a whole, and then sharing that through these religious programs, through everything else. So when you go before Greece, you will understand the relationship that the so-called melanated people, the Cometians, had with nature and spirit at the same time, through alchemy and everything, with proverbs like all is within yourself. Know your most inward self and look for what corresponds with it in nature. Your harmonics with nature, not questioning nature, not questioning spirit as being malevolent, but understanding the harmonics of nature and understanding the connections and the separations and how they work. The purpose of all human life is to achieve a state of consciousness apart from bodily concerns. This mentality, the atheism, university, physics, astrophysics mentality, is based upon bodily concerns. It's based upon the victim program. You're a victim of an evil God. So in order to make yourself God, you have to separate you have to separate yourself because of a lack of understanding of nature. Separate yourself by worshiping yourself. Worshiping only the materialistic realm from the victimized perspective. when you go into a deeper layer of understanding your reality, you will understand that you are beyond the bodily concerns of like the destructive stuff that does happen here sometimes. You are the spirit that is everlasting and never connected, never disconnected from the spirit. So that when you understand it from that perspective, your entire world shifts, the entire consciousness shifts. Know the world in yourself. Never look for yourself in the world, for this would be a projection of your illusion. This is what the actual reflection of light instead of the absorption of light reality is based upon. The origins of creating the material realm to allow light to expand, and understanding the relationships of nature. Yourself in relationship to nature, not as a blocking of nature, a blocking of light. There's a difference there. And shout out to Brother Menza for putting this piece together. This is a really nice piece. But yeah, I wanted to share this as the kind of bring it all together. Hopefully the video is still running. And know the world in yourself. Never look for yourself in the world, for this would be a projection of your illusion. So this whole Hollywood, political, dark ages, iron age reality, worshiping of the materialistic realm is a projection of the illusion. When you only understand a half-ass version of science, and you don't understand the alchemy, which is the relationship that science has with spirit. That's the actual harmonics, the absorption of light, the absorption of spirit, and being that know the world in yourself, being that spirit, as opposed to looking for your answers in the materialistic realm. There's a difference there. You can lose yourself. And this is what's happened on a conscious scale with the particular race of beings who are obviously who have had the challenge of manifesting into this reality, reflecting light, and not naturally being able to absorb it. And in order to protect its own existence, has created this illusion that we are within today in the separation of nature. So that's basically what I wanted to share with this video. So thank you for joining me, and until next time, from all my relations, peace, love, and harmony.